Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beyond Never Again, our 6-week journey exploring how the Holocaust speaks to us today, trying to take lessons and perspectives in our own lives from this crazy period in our history. Today we will be doing lesson 5, which is titled A Tree of Life for Those Who Hold Fast to It. This afternoon's lesson is generously co-sponsored by Joyce Wee, and the second half is available. If you're available to sponsor the other half of today's lesson, we greatly appreciate it. Let me know and we'll make it happen. Today's lesson is going to talk about the Torah, and it's going to talk about how the Torah has been with us through thick and through thin, at the most difficult times and through the most amazing times. Specifically today, we're going to be focusing on the most difficult times. Before we start, I want to open by asking 3 questions. Number 1 is there a way to obtain a truly objective glimpse of life in specific historical time periods? And I asked this question specifically today, because as you all know, let's take the most recent example. Charlie Kirk was, there's even more recent actually. Jimmy Kimmel was recently fired from his show, right? It takes 10 seconds and everybody's already having historical spins on it. They're pro it, they're against it, they think it was done right, think it was done wrong. It should have been done, but it should have been done in a different way. It shouldn't have been done, but he should have been reprimanded. Whatever it is, right? Charlie Kirk was murdered. Obviously everybody thinks a murder is a horrible thing, right? But right afterwards, everybody's painting it in their own historical context. And for sure, when you talk about, let's say, the 2020 election, the 2016 election, already you know how many books have been written about these things already? You know, thousands of books have already been written with every person's perspective on it. And even though many of them claim to be history books, they're giving you their particular spin on it. So the question is there a different way, other than reading a historian, and we know every single historian is biased, they're giving you their take and their perspective on it, is there a way to get some sort of real objective glimpse of life during specific historical time periods? And in our case, we're going to ask that question about the Holocaust. That's one question that I want to open with. Another question I want to ask is, what was the role that the Torah played in the death camps, or in the ghettos, or under Nazi oppression, or even before that, during the times of the Crusaders, etc.? Well, you know already the title of today's lesson. You're joining us here, Jeff?
If I may.
Welcome. We have somebody here in person, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just make him a seat. There you go. Right there.
Oh, I got the King's.
You got the King's.
The Prince's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You guys can't tell, but I'm not wearing pants. He can see, because on Zoom they can't. They can only see the top half.
I'm leaving.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jeff. Welcome. So I guess the second question that we're going to ask is, what role does the Torah play when you're in such a difficult situation, particularly when you're actually not keeping a lot of the Torah? We can imagine that people in the death camps were not keeping kosher. We're probably not keeping Shabbos. I don't mean because they didn't care about these things. I mean because it was a difficult situation. So if you're not following the Torah 100%, right, and so then what is the role that Halachah and the Torah plays? That's another thing we're going to examine. And the third question I'd like to open up with is, were those that lived there, were they able to bring a sense of sanity or even sanctity into their lives? Was there a way, and again, this has been a theme throughout our course, that they can spiritually resist the Nazis despite the oppression that they were putting them under? Okay, so those are the questions we're starting off with, and we're going to answer them in 3 ways. Number 1, the first section is called Living Law. We're going to talk about the Torah not just as a book of laws, but as a book of living laws, and more about that in just a moment. We're then going to talk about this notion of primary sources, not just trusting historical documents, but actually trusting current documents from back then. Again, more on this in a moment. And finally, we're going to conclude with the section called More Precious Than Gold, the amazing role that the Torah plays in our lives today. Are we ready?
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay. So if you open up your textbooks to page 120, there is a learning activity. Okay, we're asking you a simple question. I'd love to hear from one of you. Imagine that you are going to a distant civilization a distant country far from Western civilization. My favorite way to do this is you're going to outer space. Okay? You're going to Mars. You're the first one to colonize Mars. All right? On behalf of the human species, we're sending you. And because of space constraints, because obviously in the shuttle you can only take so much, you can only take one thing with you that will help you remind you of your culture and your identity. What are you taking with you? I'll take 3 answers if we can. Raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Anybody? Marilyn, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute yourself. You're muted.
The Torah.
You're taking the Torah with you, the scroll?
No, probably take the hummus.
Like a pocket-sized chumash or something. Okay, I love
Yeah.
it. Anybody else? Gloria, what are you taking with you?
Well, I was going to say that too.
You guys are giving me the answers that I want to hear. I want to hear what you have to say. Adam, what are you taking with you? Come on, your computer. Come on, something. What are you taking?
Probably some book of some sort, but I don't know. That's an interesting question.
All right. I know, it's something to think about.
Yeah.
You have an answer, Jeff?
Well, my answer would have been the Tanakh, but
But we said that
but
already.
to look for a troublemaker, the Beatles albums.
He's taking a Beatles album with him. All right. Okay. He wants to provide, fodder for me to jump off of. Nobody's taking picture album? Oh, Anya, go ahead.
A blanket.
Oh, a blanket? To remind you of home?
Oh.
I guess
Yes.
a significant blanket, like something that maybe from your childhood or whatever.
Yes. Yep.
The reason we're asking this question is because we're actually going to examine what it was that King David took with him. King David and the reason we keep referencing King David in this course is because King David is one of those people who actually led a very, very tumultuous life. And he had to dig very, very, as we've discussed at length in this course, and he had to dig deep into his reservoirs to see, what are the important things to him. So let's start with text 1. Adam, if we can ask you to start off for us. We're on page 121, text 1. This, by the way, this is from a chapter of Tehillim, chapter in Psalms. It's the longest one, 119. It's the longest chapter of Tehillim. The entire chapter talks about nothing else other than how much King David loves the Torah and loves the mitzvoth. Okay? He does so with each of the Aleph Bet, and each one he has 8 verses for. So 8 verses for Aleph, then 8 verses for Bet, then 8 verses for Gimel, etc. Adam, if you can, please text 1.
Were not your Torah my occupation, then I would have perished in my affliction. I shall never forget your precepts, for through them you have sustained me. I am yours, save me, for I sought your precepts concerning me. The wicked hoped to destroy me. I shall ponder your testimonies. Of every finite thing I have seen the end. Your commandments are very broad. How I love your Torah all day. It is my conversation. Each of your commandments makes me wiser than my enemies, for it is always mine.
So King David chooses to take with him the Torah. And there's all these verses that he says about how they almost destroyed me, but I didn't forsake your precepts, right? The mitzvot. Distress and anguish, but your commandments were the only thing that I was busy with. In other words, to him, the Torah is the most important thing that he takes with me. And I think that all of you mentioned this, both those that said Tanakh, but even if you didn't say Tanakh, even if you didn't say the Chumash, even if you didn't say a Torah, that's what you would take with you. Presumably, you would take maybe a photo album or a passport or, I don't know, some, like your ketubah or whatever with you, or your tefillin with you. But most likely, you would take the Torah in your heart. You would take the Torah in your neshama, in your mind, and that would stay with you. And I think there's a reason for this. Why is it that King David finds the Torah to be the most important thing for him in times of distress? The reason is because the Torah is not just a book of laws. It's a common mistake that people make, not people on my Zooms, because they've been to classes before, and they already know that the Torah is not just supposed to be a book of laws, it's not just supposed to be a historical document, it's supposed to be much more than that. What is the Torah? So, Gloria, can you read for us, please, text 2, on page 122. This is from
Torah.
Yeah.
Torah, as its Hebrew root implies, is a form of the Hebrew word hara, teaching. It teaches man the path he should follow, and is indeed a guide to fulfilling the commandments. Yet it is also far more than that. It is a comprehensive guide, the expression of Judaism's conception of everything in the world. Hence, whether the subject is concrete and practical, or abstract and spiritual, whether it expresses an immediate and living need, or is entirely theoretical and without practical application, since it is related to Judaism's worldview, it is related to Torah, and Torah does indeed deal with it. The ultimate purpose of Torah is not then only to scrutinize the commandments and reach practical conclusions regarding them. It is rather to provide a comprehensive worldview, bringing out both the essential relationship of Torah to every subject and also the subject's connections with each other.
Thank you, Gloria. So the Torah is supposed to be not just a historical document, which it is, not just an accounting of the stories of our forefathers, etc., which it is, and not just a book of laws, which it is, but it's also supposed to be our guide for life. Now, this begins to become very, very different than the way we classically think of Torah. Because we classically think of Torah as in the words that there are in the Torah. But now we're saying that no. You want to know whether you should get an iPhone or an Android. Okay? A very benign question, which seems to not be in the Torah at all. What we're saying now is that's in the Torah. You want to know, should I vote Republican or Democrat? That's in the Torah. You want to know, now, granted, people can see things differently in the Torah, but it's supposed to be, that is the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be, you want to know whether you should or shouldn't take this job. You should be able to see it in the Torah. You want to know whether you should travel to this city or not. It's in the Torah, right? Now, all of a sudden, that's a very broad statement. That's no longer anymore, I'm taking it with me because it's a book of inspiration. And 50% of the time it's not going to help me, but for the 50% of the time that it will, it'll give me moral fortitude to be able to get through them. No. Now we're saying somehow you're supposed to see every single thing in the Torah. Now, this becomes challenging. Why does it become challenging? It becomes challenging, as I'm sure many of you thought already as I was giving my examples, which I did intentionally. Most of the things that I said are new things. They weren't around in the year 2448 to the Jewish year, right? We're still in 5785. This evening we'll be in 5786, right? In the year 2248, we got the Torah. So the Torah addressed camels. It spoke about camels and what happens if your ox gores another ox. But it didn't speak about car accidents. And it didn't speak about iPhone or Android. And it didn't speak about Republican or Democrat. It said, okay, Republican or Democrat, maybe you can see a little more in because you can see what they stand for, whatever, and those values are in the Torah. But like, how are you supposed to see those things? The more the Torah changes as we go through life, how is it giving us that advice? And by the way, when we say this, we mean this on a daily level. We mean this on a global level. We mean this on a daily, like, which shoe should I tie first, right? How do I use the restroom? Literally things like this. And on a world outlook, like, what is my global view about whatever, world hunger, and how you live with that as a Jew, right? Or how you solve that as a Jew, or whatever it is. So it's really supposed to affect every single area of our lives, which is why in the Torah you find very, very non-politically correct terms. Today, it's not very popular to say, this is good, this is bad, right? Usually you just say, well, personally, I don't like this person. Personally, I don't like this thing. Personally, I don't like that food, right? But if you do, that's okay. It's not my style, right? That's the PC way to go about life. You don't find those kind of statements in the Torah. In the Torah, things are good or evil. They're right or they're wrong. They're righteous or they're wicked. In fact, there's a supplementary text at the back. Supplementary text C. I'll give you guys the page number in just a moment. It's on page 138 in your books. I think it'll really give us some insight here. We'll ask Jeff, who's in the room with us, to read for us, please. This is from Rabbi J. David Belaich. Rabbi David Belaich is known as. And he has a very, very important point which he makes. Go ahead.
The Torah contains not merely a set of laws, but also canons of interpretation as well as principles according to which possible internal conflicts may be resolved. Maimonides records the doctrine that the Torah will not be altered, either in its entirety or in part, as one of the 13 principles of faith. Once revealed, the Torah does not remain in the heavenly domain. Man is charged with interpretation of the text, resolution of doubts, and application of the provisions of its laws to novel situations. The foregoing should not in any sense generate the impression that subjective considerations or volitional inclinations may ever be allowed consciously to influence scholarly opinion. Torah study requires, first and foremost, intellectual honesty. It is a travesty of the halachic process to begin with a preconceived conclusion and then attempt to justify it by means of halachic dialectic. Neither Hillel nor Shammai nor any of their spiritual errors engaged in sophistry in order to justify previously held viewpoints. The dialectic of halachic reasoning has always been conducted in the spirit of Yaakov Adin et Haor. Let the law bore through the mountain. The law must be determined on its own merit, and let the chips fall where they may.
So we need to be able to look at the Torah and take advice from the Torah, even if it's not the advice that we want. Okay? Now, the obvious big question, let's go back to our textbooks to page 123. The obvious big question is, what happens when things change? What happens when we're faced with novel situations? And you can see already that we're getting to the Holocaust era, because the Holocaust obviously presented an era in history where nothing was the same anymore, right? It was the universe had changed. The rules of the universe had changed. So let's see, again, before we get into the Holocaust, let's see what our approach is supposed to be to dealing with this. Marilyn, if we can ask you to read for us, please, text 3a, which is directly from the Torah, page 123. Text 3a, which is directly from the Torah, which gives us advice, and granted, right now it's general, and then we're going to have to understand how that works, right? But what are we supposed to do when there's a new case that arises, iPhone or Android, for example, right? New case arises, we believe as Jews that we're supposed to be turning to the Torah for advice, and yet the Torah doesn't seem to be addressing this issue. A car accident, right? What do we do? Text 3a.
If you are unable to reach a decision in a case involving capital punishment, litigation, leprous marks, or any other case where there is a dispute in your territorial courts, then you must set out and go up to the place that Hashem, your Lord, has chose. You must approach the Levitical priests and other members of the Supreme Court that exists at the time. When you make inquiry, they will declare to you a legal decision.
Okay, and keep going, text 3b, please, where Rashi explains these verses.
Although this judge may not be of the same stature as other judges who preceded him, you must listen to him. You have only the judge of your time.
Okay, now, I don't want to turn this into a long conversation about the halachic legal process and how the Torah works when it comes to legal questions, legal decisions. You'll have to trust me. You have two choices. Either you can trust me that there's a system in place to make sure that this doesn't get perverted by individual people, and this doesn't get corrupted by one person's perspective, and there aren't people out there trying to form opinions and then use the Torah to back them up, etc. Right? I'm not saying there aren't people like that. I'm saying you'll have to trust me that there's a system in place to thwart that. Or if you don't want to trust me, you have another option. You need to dedicate 9 hours of your life to watching a course that I gave in the past, which is called Judaism Decoded. It is essentially a course that goes through the origins of the oral Torah and how this works and how the process worked throughout the generations where things were challenged and perhaps there were corrupt rabbis that did things and how we put things in place in order to circumvent that, etc., etc., etc. For now, what I want you to understand most importantly is that the Jewish way has always been as follows. The Torah is the core and the tree of life, if you will, that we cling to whenever we have a question. Even if it's a question like iPhone or Android. Even if it's a question like Republican or Democrat. Even if it's a question that doesn't seem to have the answer in the Torah. You don't see the answer in the Torah? That's okay. That's normal, right? The Torah is a limited document, at least in its physical words. So you have to be able to apply the Torah and live with the Torah. And this is why the Torah is a living organism. And throughout the generations, that is the job of rabbis. By rabbis, I don't even necessarily mean me. I mean, especially back in the day, there was a system of courts and Supreme Courts, etc. And today, there's other systems in place through which we can glean in advice and guidance from the Torah. Okay. This really brings us to the topic that I do want to discuss today. Okay. The topic that I want to discuss today is an area of Jewish life, of Jewish literature, called responsa, okay? Or in Hebrew, shut or sha'alot u'tshuvot. Shut is an acronym which stands for sha'alot u'tshuvot, questions and answers. And now I get to plug an upcoming course. Are you ready? Okay. Hold on, I'll give you the exact dates because I have the booklet in front of me. Just came back from the printer literally an hour ago. Okay. Beginning on January 19th, I'm going to be giving a 6-week course, which is called Captivating Cases in Rabbinic Responsa. And what we are going to be doing is we are going to be going through hundreds of years. I'm talking about centuries upon centuries upon centuries of literature, some of which, by the way, are behind me here on the shelves. Right here, I have here. This one is called Igrot Moshe. Rabbi Label and I study this every week. It's from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who only passed away 30 years ago. He has a whole set right here. There's the other set I have. It's over there next to Jeff. Jeff is keeping an eye on it. It's called Shut HaRashba, which means the shilos and the questions and answers that were asked of the Rashba, another very famous Jewish rabbi, but this one who lived like 500, 600 years ago. What am I trying to tell you? What I'm trying to tell you is we have a record of literally over 1,000 years of Sha'alot U'Tshuvot, of questions and answers. What do these questions and answers look like? It looks like somebody on this Zoom, including myself, by the way. I'm not a rabbi in this context, okay? it looks like one of us asking a question. The question is usually between 2 and 20 lines, because that's how long questions usually are. And then there's a response to that question. And the response to that question is usually about 10 or 20 pages. Not always, it could be 1 page, but it's many pages. Why? Because they're not just giving the question to this person. They're giving the question, they're trying to give the answer. In other words, they're trying to be part of the living organism. They're trying to give the answer to this question in the historical context. So what they will do is they will give the answer to the question, but instead of just saying yes or no, so let's say the question is iPhone or Android according to the Torah, right? They won't just say iPhone or Android. They will say, well, let's see which topics in the Torah would be relevant to this. There's a verse in the Torah that says this, and there's a verse in the Torah that says that, and then they'll back to them. And the Talmud says this, and this rabbi says that, and this, and they'll give you a whole an essay as a response. And there's fascinating questions that have come up throughout history that have been answered in this manner. Okay, let me give you one real life example. Okay, let's look at text 4. Text 4 is from Rashi. Okay, now, guaranteed none of you have ever studied this before. Why? Most people do not study this part of Rashi. When they say they study Rashi, they mean they've opened up a Chumash, and then they've seen Rashi at the bottom. They've opened up a Talmud, they've seen Rashi on the sides. In other words, basically, they have used Rashi as a commentary to explain something. But it turns out that Rashi was a rabbi like all of the rabbis. And he also had questions that came before him that he then had to answer, and that he then had to back up with sources as he answered them. Right? By the way, I've definitely mentioned this in classes before. I don't know if I mentioned this class. There's I guess somebody's hobby, probably. It's like a little online Jewish startup that they have set. It's called Hamapa. Hamapa means the map. And they've set out to create an interactive map. You can go to their website. Maybe I'll link it in the after lesson email. They've set out to create an interactive map to see each rabbi, especially the most famous ones that we have today. We have all their responsa, or responsum, I guess in the plural. They've set out to create maps of their influence. So, for example, Rashi lives in Troyes in France. Okay, little dot, and then they'll have like a heat map, which kind of goes from where Rashi is, because all the questioners wrote where they were from, and they were asking from all over the world, or at least as far as Rashi's influence went to, right? And you can see each of these rabbis. And as you go through the years, you can see how the rabbis are shifting and Judaism is moving. It's kind of like a live heat map, which shows you where Judaism is and where the discussions about Jewish topics are happening at any given moment. So, for example, today, most likely the largest heat maps in the world would be in the U.S. and in Israel, right? Or whatever, Northern America, U.S. and Canada, and Israel. And even in Northern America, it would be in North America would be U.S. primarily, and maybe, let's say, New York or Los Angeles would be a little hotter, or whatever, maybe in Texas, where Jews are located. Now, you guys don't know all of this because you live here today, right? But you fast forward 1,000 generations, right? This is something interesting that you can see about Judaism through this lens, okay? So that's why I'm inviting you to this upcoming course, because I think you'll find it fascinating. But it's also it's really the topic of today's lesson, okay? So let's do one as an example. This is Rashi. What is the question that is posed to Rashi? I'll do the question because we're not going to quote the whole responsa, obviously. And then we'll ask Jonathan Gelman if he can read for us the answer, which is going to be text 4 on page 124. Okay, so Jonathan, you can get ready for that. Let me give you the case. Rashi, by the way, lives during the era of the First Crusade. Okay, so this is during the years 1095, 1096, when German Jewry is being devastated by the Crusades. And there's a lot of forced conversions going on. There's a lot of Jewish persecution going on. And in this case, a Jewish man and a Jewish woman, both of who had been forcibly converted, they subsequently get married in accordance with Jewish law. After some time, I guess, the persecution had lessened, and they were able to return to their openly Jewish lives. Beautiful. Now they want to get divorced. Life moves on. Something happened. They want to get divorced. They want to get divorced according to Jewish law. And the question is this woman even in need of a Jewish divorce if in between they convert, not even just in between, during the time they got married, they were living openly as Christians. They got married according to Jewish law, but they were living openly as Christians. Let's see what Rashi says. John, when you're ready, text 4. Don't forget to unmute yourself. There you go.
Herewith do I, the undersigned, answer him who has questioned me concerning the marriage of a certain girl who was married, and both the bride and the groom, as well as the witness to the ceremony, had been forced by Gentiles to disavow and violate the precepts of the Torah. I'm of the opinion that this woman requires a Jewish bill of divorcement before she can marry another man. Even with the marriage of someone who voluntarily become an apostate and then married is legal and binding according to Jewish law. For it is said, Israel has transgressed. meaning that even though he has transgressed, he is still an Israelite. How much the more is true in the case of the forced converts who at heart are still loyal to God. In this particular case, their final conduct reflects their original attitude, for when they were able to find some form of escape, they left and returned to Judaism. Peace, Shlomo, the son of Rabbi Isaac.
Okay, so this is Rashi answering that question. Now, by the way, I want to show you a lot of things about this text that maybe didn't occur to you right away, because it seems like a question and an answer, and he's giving an answer based on a quote in the Talmud, which is based on a verse in the Torah. Beautiful, right? But I want to point out a few things to you. First of all, it's an important text because it demonstrates that Halachah, Jewish law, is being applied even to people that are not keeping the Torah the way it's supposed to be kept. Does that make sense? These people were not supposed to be keeping Christianity. We're not supposed to be even openly practicing Christianity. They weren't supposed to be doing that. In this way, it seems a little similar to the types of questions that I get. And by the way, I have no doubt that 1,000 years from now, God willing, Mashiach should come and it should be in the era of Mashiach, they will examine the questions that were asked of me and Rabbi Hanoka. And there will be questions like, well, my husband isn't Jewish, but I want to bar mitzvah my son, and how should I go about it? Well, we don't really keep Torah and mitzvot, but when it comes to burying my mother, I want to do it properly. You know what I mean? All these different questions. Or people like, my house just burned down in the Eaton fire, and I don't really practice Judaism, but I had a ketubah and I was married properly, and I want to redo my ketubah. Can I get that done? All these questions that are being asked by real people in real life. Real people. The Torah talks in absolutes. Good, bad, evil, righteous. But real people are not like that. Real people are evolving, they're changing, they're living their lives. They're living in a Nazi occupation. They're living in a tumultuous American period of history where everyone is divided. They're living at a time of extreme assimilation. And yes, they would have loved to grow up perhaps with a wonderful Jewish education, but they didn't. They grew up in a non-religious home. They brought up completely secular. These are the realities of life that rabbis need to deal with. They need to answer those questions, and it's not new. Rashi is doing this over 1,000 years ago. That's what I'm trying to show you here. But also, I want to show you something else. Very often when people read these responses, they make the mistake of looking at it and saying, this is such a beautiful answer. And they forget that there's a whole other piece of literature here, which is the question. The person who's asking the question is asking this question for a reason. What can we learn about the person who's asking this question, about the era that they live in? For example, we see that Rashi is dealing with this as if this is bread and butter. This is just regular day-to-day life that people are being forced to convert to Christianity. Today, that's not a reality. Today, Baruch Hashem, the Christians, for the most part, are very kind to the Jewish people. There are others that are not so much, okay. But the Christians, they don't have to worry about it anymore, right? But it's fascinating to see that coming from that time of history, in that period, this tells you a lot about the time period that you're in. This brings me to my next point. The second point that I want to make in this lesson is this notion of primary sources. You see, as discussed in the opening introduction to this lesson, history is often perverted by the people that are telling you the story, okay? Meaning to say, you read a book, even if it's a wonderful book and you love the author. The fact is, he's telling you the story, either colored by his own glasses, not either, certainly colored by his own glasses, as well as colored by the glasses of the people who were living at that time. Is there a way that somehow we can get a glimpse into an area where people are not projecting? Is there any literature that exists from a period in history that perhaps is not colored by the glasses of they're trying to tell the story in a certain way? And the answer is, even though it seems like not, the answer is a resounding yes. Let me explain. If you can find a piece of responsa, which remember, responsa are not written for history. Responsa are written to answer the person live today, based on the situation, the world, and the life that we're living in, then you gain an insight into something live as the people that were living at that time viewed it, not the way they were projecting it for future generations. By the way, this is true even about other things that you can do. When you browse old news stories, when you read history books, or when you examine legal cases, you're getting them based on the context that they want to project it for future generations. But if you read a living document from a period, for case in point, Anne Frank's diary, right, on the screen here in front of us, I don't think there's a single person that believes that Anne Frank was writing the diary because she thought that one day, there's a lot of things in there, for those that have read it, that she would not have written about if she knew the entire world was going to be reading her diary. You know what I mean? And obviously, The reason that it's become so popular is because of its authenticity, because of its ability to. Now, everybody understands this is still only Anne Frank's perspective. That's fine, but it's not Anne Frank's perspective as it's being shrouded or clouded, or corrupted in the way that she wants to give it over to future generations. It's just her living her life live. Let me give you another example. If in 1,000 years from now, a legal scholar decides to go through all of the cases in U.S. case law, right? We have a lawyer here in the room with us. There's another one here on the Zoom, right? You go through all the cases of U.S. It's not going to take a rocket scientist to figure out that the U.S. is currently going through a drug problem. There's going to be thousands of cases, right, that are dealing with the fact this person's on drugs while he's saying something, this person is addicted to drugs, this person got the drugs from this person, these drugs are illegal, these drugs are not illegal, there's court renderings that are being court verdicts that are being coming down every other minute, something to do with drugs, and exactly, marijuana should be legal, it shouldn't be legal, and there's millions of cases, well, maybe millions is an exaggeration, but hundreds of thousands for sure, related to drugs. It's not going to take a rocket scientist to look at it and understand that that's part of what we are living with today. They won't have to be me or you to know that. They can look at those cases and they will see a live picture coming to life. Another example, I think many of you are familiar with the Dred Scott case. Yes? Raise your hand. From civil liberties class when you were in high school. Anybody remember? Come on. You remember? Okay. Jeff raised his hand and went like this. Like, ish.
Yeah, ish.
Okay. My point is just, without getting into the details of that case, that tells you something about the time of the U.S. That this was at a time where there was the North and the South, and there was slavery was legal or slavery was illegal, and even if it was before the official Civil War, which I think the Dred Scott case was, right? It tells you that there's a civil war coming, and it tells you, it paints a picture of that era of history. Okay, so now to the topic of today's lesson. I have it here in the office. Give me a second. Hold on. Everybody hold just one moment. I'll find the book, and then it'll be a much more powerful demonstration.
I'm holding my breath. Hurry up.
Here it is. This is a book, which is an English book, by the way. Highly, highly recommended, okay? It's called Responsa from the Holocaust, and it's written by Rabbi Ephraim Ushry. Okay? Now, this is an English digest of 5 volumes that he wrote. And we're gonna read the history about it to understand why this is such a valuable document. And it's not the only one, by the way. We have a few of them. Because there were rabbis in the Holocaust as well. This is how I know I have job security. Because even if a Holocaust comes, rabbis have a job. You're soon going to find out. I'm making such a morbid joke, but it's true. It's the only way to get through these topics. So before we read text 5, I want to call your attention to the video screens. We're going to watch a video about Rabbi Ephraim Ushry, and then we'll read text 5, which is from him, about the history of this book and the history of these responsa that he has. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
TorahCafe.com.
How are you?
In 1941, residents of the Kovna ghetto served as forced laborers, aiding the Nazi military. Rabbi Ephraim Ushry was assigned the relatively easy task of removing lice from the soldiers' clothes.
Het gehad hat Feres Bachirim. Was man jeden Tag gelernt, alle Tag hat man gelernt mit Bachirim. Mit der Fleißigkeit, mit der Brenn, man sich mit Faulplätze gewähne lernen. Der Bucher der Zeit ist gewesen, zusammen in Kovna Ghetto mit Mataten, wurden gefragt, was haben die Bucher getracht, sich in der Eis zuhren? Wieso haben sie gehabt, den Kopf zu lernen? Haben sie geämpft, dass weil sie gewiss, dass sie gehen morgen weg von der Welt, haben sie gewiss, dass sie haben nicht mehr wie das auf der Welt noch teurer, haben sie so gelernt, dass er Fleißigkeit ist, wollte kein Wunsch geben, dass er mir Simche, dass er mir Israski.
In 1943, Rabbi Shapiro, the rabbi of Kovna, passed away. Bereft of leadership, the people turned to Ushry with their pressing questions regarding Jewish law. He later wrote, The inquiries to which I responded were neither academic questions posed by scholars, nor scenarios proposed by eccentrics playing theoretical games. They were questions asked by ordinary Jews who refused to be turned into instinctive animals in search of bare survival. These Jews tenaciously upheld their obligation under the divine covenant to observe to the best of their ability, even in the ghetto, the commandments of God's Torah, the divine blueprint of true human civilization. Ushri jotted down notes regarding the questions and answers and hid them in the ground. After the war, he dug them up and elaborated on the sources. These questions were the basis of his 5-volume series of responsa about the Holocaust. He later wrote, "I dug up my notes and proceeded to examine the sources at greater length. Only then did I begin to perceive the significance of the questions as an indelible record of Jewish uniqueness. Did our enemies ask their priests and ministers how to care for the Jewish dead? Were they concerned about whether one may use clothes stolen from a dead Jew? Did they receive dispensation to bayonet pregnant women? In contrast, I was asked detailed, astonishingly moving questions. Jews asked, what were the proper blessings to say after eating when one was forced to eat on a fast day? They asked me the correct form of a blessing one would say before going to one's death in sanctification of God. What do you say to a Jew who is a Jew unto his death? It is so elementary that tears are not sufficient."
So this is the primary sources that we are going to be using today in our class to examine the Holocaust today. We're going to be looking at the questions that Jews asked, not all of them, obviously, a selection of questions. Again, by the way, with that same cardinal rule that we opened up with in lesson 1, which is that if you want to appreciate the Holocaust, you need to appreciate it through the lens of particular individual people. So today, we're going to be looking at the halachic questions that people ask during the Holocaust, in the ghettos and in the death camps, etc. Some of them will be benign, but as upon examination of the questioner, where they're coming from, on the response and why he's responding in that way, we are going to understand exactly. We'll learn some things about these people that will have profound impact and profound lessons on our lives today. Okay, so that is the plan for today. I do have to take a moment to plug another. I'm sure there are some of you, and listen, I have a whole booklet here to plug, so slowly, I'm going to have to get through all of them. For those of you that were watching today and were using the subtitles and don't want to use the subtitles, there is a course coming up. Here it is, starting October 16th. It's a 4-week course. It's called a Crash Course in Mama Lashon. It's a 4-week starter course navigating Yiddish. And if you'd like to enter the world of Yiddish, not in a sad way, in a fun and upbeat and entertaining way, and learn Yiddish while doing so, I encourage you to join that. It's going to be on Thursday nights at 6:30. It's a different course. Again, I'll put it in the after lesson email, and you'll see it all. You guys will all get this in the mail. Don't worry. Okay. Text 5 is the text that was quoted a few times during the video. Ron, if we can ask you to read it for us, please. It's from Rabbi Ushri himself, telling us the story of how he preserved these documents. Go ahead.
I was a young rabbi in Kovno ghetto, in the Kovno ghetto of Lithuania, whose great Jewish minds were known throughout the Jewish world. People, the plain people, approached me with their questions. Because life was not normal and there was a war on, they were not always sure what the Torah required of them. Source books were not available, and I could not rule on these questions the way I would have in normal times. My memory had to serve me. But I did write down the questions and my brief rulings on paper torn from cement sacks, which I hid in cans that I buried in the ghetto soil to preserve them. If I survived, I thought I'd expand the notes into full-length responses. When we realized that we were the targets of the Germans just because we were Jews, that our Jewishness was being attacked, then our Jewish pride came to the fore. I am not speaking of a wonder-working rabbis who secretly and humbly had mastered the Talmud and Kabbalah, but simply Jews whose faith in the Almighty was the core of their being. Such a Jew simply follows the dictates of the Torah as he or she knows best. And when they don't know, they approach a rabbi whose authority and wider knowledge and accessibility to the sources is recognized and relied upon. And so Jews approached me. Through the divine watchfulness of God, I survived and was able to return and forage for the cans of questions and answers I had hidden away. I was asked detailed, astonishingly moving questions. The world at large may not understand this, but the greatness of Jews can be seen in these very concerns. Can the modern Jew fathom it? Can the world fathom it? Does one laugh perplexed? Does one gasp amazed? Because it is amazing.
Okay. So this is a fascinating insight, but it's also going to be a wonderful journey. It's going to be emotional because of the thinking of where the people who are asking the questions are coming from, but it's wonderful because I want you to keep the following thing in mind as we go through. These Jews are the ultimate of what we introduced in lesson 2 as spiritual resistance. These are people who in theory should say, you know what, to hell with God, to hell with what the Torah wants me to do. I'm just trying to survive. And yet they want to survive the right way. They will go all the way to the end, attempting to cling to the Torah, to hold fast to the Torah, and to keep the Torah as much as they can. This whole thinking of Rabbi Oshri and thinking of this context here, it's very reminiscent to me of a story that I heard from when I was very, very young. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. So when my brother, who's about, let's say, 8 years older than me, turned bar mitzvah, how old would I have been? 5. That's the first time I heard this story. And I heard it over and over again at each of my brother's bar mitzvahs and many times since from my grandfather. My grandfather, when he turned 13 years old, was given a bar mitzvah present. My grandfather was growing up in Georgia at the time, which was in his former Soviet Union. They lived there because his father was a rabbi, had heard that the KGB was after him, and ran. They went as far as they could because you couldn't immigrate out of the Soviet Union. But all the way to the edge, Georgia, the KGB's arm was like a little less. They let the Georgians have a little bit more freedom, whatever it was. He was fairly safe there. And yet still, even because he went there and he continued to practice Judaism, continued to encourage others to practice Judaism, my great-grandfather was arrested. And for my grandfather's 13th birthday, for his bar mitzvah, his gift was that my great-grandmother took him on a journey to some gulag, wherever it was, not in Siberia, but somewhere in that area of the former Soviet Union, and he got to visit his grandfather. Okay? Oh, sorry, he got to visit his father, my great-grandfather. And what he told him then are words that have been repeated in my family ever since, over and over and over again. What did he say to him? He said, Azriel medarfkenen halacha. He said to him, Azriel, and many of you have met my grandfather, by the way. Those of you that came with me on the trip to New York, you definitely met him, and many of you, when he came here, other opportunities. He's still alive. Can I know him? May he live and be well. He's 92 or 93 now. Can I know him? He said to him, Azriel, you need to know Jewish law. Said, okay, fine, no, beautiful. That sounds like typical words that a father would say to their son. He says, no. He says to him, you need to know what are the 39 avos malachos and what are the derivatives thereof. The 39 avot malachot are the 39 master laws that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. and an in-depth study of the laws of Shabbat essentially is knowing those 39, and then knowing any action that you do, does it fall under this one or not, right? Like which one of the 39 does it fall under? He says, why do you need to know? He says, look at me. He was in the Gulag, and he was forced to work on Shabbos. His job in the Gulag was, they had these machines that they would use. There were machines, I don't remember the details of the machines, and his job, I guess he was handy, his job was to fix the machines. Whenever they broke, he would have to fix the machines. And he says to him, what do you think I do on Shabbos? He says, I need to know how I can do something and minimize the amount of Shabbat that I'm desecrating. How I can do it, but and still do what they ask me to do, because otherwise my life is at stake, so you're supposed to do it, but still desecrate Shabbat in the least way possible, right? This is what we're talking about here. We're not, as he clarifies, we're not here talking about these amazing tzaddikim. We're not talking about these miraculous Jews we're talking about simple Jews that are coming to a rabbi and saying, this is the situation, how should we deal with it? Let's jump into it. Text 6 is going to be our first responsum. Steve Muller, you have the book with you? If you can read for us, please, text 6, I would be grateful. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Steve. We cannot hear you, Steve. We need you to unmute first. Important factor. Still not. There you go.
All right. On the tragic day, the 8th of Bar Cheshvan, 1502, which October 29th, 1941, at the time of the large-scale operation that was called Action, when more than 10,000 people were taken away from the Kovno ghetto to be butchered like sheep, I was asked by some of the miserable survivors whether they were obliged to recite the Hagomel blessing to thank God for his kindness in allowing them to be saved from this destruction. Or perhaps they were not obligated to recite the blessing because they were still in danger. They remained locked and imprisoned within the ghetto walls, surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence. No one was allowed to come or go. Besides for this, there were armed guards stationed at the ghetto gates guarding the exits. Hence, they were essentially like prisoners who had still not been freed from their distress.
So this is an interesting question. Why is it such an interesting question? Let me give you the context of the blessing of Hagomel. For those of you who are not familiar, the blessing of Hagomel is a blessing that we say at the Torah, with an aliyah to the Torah, after surviving a harrowing experience. Okay, so the typical harrowing experiences are, like today, for example, the most common time that somebody says Hagomel is when they've traveled overseas. It's still considered harrowing. You never know. Something could happen. The plane could go down, right? There might not be a miracle on the Hudson. So you come down, you come back. Okay, you make a blessing thanking Hashem that you went safely, you came back safely. Another example, someone survives an illness. If somebody who has cancer, he goes through the worst, radiation and chemotherapy and God knows what. He comes back, he's doing okay, makes a blessing Hagomel. It's called to the Torah, he makes a blessing Hagomel, Chayavim Tov Shmolani Tov. God who grants salvation, who in his kindness allows us to survive. Beautiful. The problem is that in this situation, and this is how Rabbi Ashri deals with this question, is hold on a second. Just because you survived one terrible instance from the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, these are cruel butchers you're talking about. You don't know. Maybe they decided they're taking 10,000 this way, and all the survivors are being killed. So you're not really out of danger. Okay? So his answer is that you actually do not make the blessing of Gomel. You cannot thank God. Even though you did survive one thing, you're still in a situation of distress. You're still in a situation of danger. So therefore, you cannot make the blessing for being released from distress. Pause. Before we get to the next question, which we're then going to be able to contrast with this question, and we'll see how he's dealing with each of these situations as they're coming. What does this question tell you about the mindset of the people that are asking this question? Anybody want to jump in here? Gail, you want to unmute for us? You want to tell us maybe your thoughts? Release?
Well, I think that you can consider yourself blessed that you missed the annihilation that just happened, and you can hope that kind of good fortune will continue.
Can I ask you a question, Gail? Before you saw this question, did you think of the people that survived the Kovna ghetto? Well, not that you ever thought of the Kovna ghetto necessarily, but if when you thought of people that survived one selection where 10,000 people were sent to their death and they managed to survive it, did you think of them as blessed? Did you think of them as? I think I would have thought of them as like they're still victims of the Holocaust, and it still remains to be seen whether they're going to survive or not. But here we see that their attitude was one that they felt blessed. They did. They felt grateful. They felt thankful, even though they felt worried. Even though they felt nervous and anxious about the future. What does that tell us about the way we should go about our lives? We often are anxious and stressed about the future. Do we often reflect on the things that we did survive? Reflect on the things that we did. Sorry, it's just a call coming in. I'm going to ignore it. Oops. And another point. How do they choose to reflect? They want to know, does Jewish law require them to thank God or not? Because they feel both. They feel anxious about the future and blessed for the current. But they still want to know, does Jewish law obligate them to make this blessing? Okay. This is how he answered this one. They should not be making the blessing, thanking God. Even though they feel thankful, they're still in mortal danger, they're still in physical danger, they're still in harm's way, they're not out of harm's way, so they should make this blessing. Okay. This is going to be fascinating to see when it comes to the next response. Okay, now for the next response, we need a little introduction. The introduction is text. We need a brief introduction. This brief introduction is about the laws of the blessings of the morning. I'm sure many of you say these blessings. It's part of the morning service. Before you come to shul, in the morning, you wake up, you say Moda'ani, that's the first prayer out of a Jew's mouth. In the morning, we say Moda'ani, thanking Hashem for giving us a new day. And then we start to bless Hashem for different things. We bless Hashem for being able to walk upright, for the fact that we're not crippled. We bless Hashem for being able to clothe ourselves, and we don't have to walk around naked. We bless Hashem for the fact that we got enough sleep last night and we don't walk around with that energy. Beautiful. Okay. There's one blessing which goes as follows. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Shelo asani aved. That you did not make me a slave. This is a fascinating blessing. If I would tell you about it last week, you would have said, beautiful. It's a blessing for freedom. I am thankful I'm not a slave. I'm thankful that I have my own ownership. Right? Can you see where this question is leading? Gloria, can you read it for us, please? Text 7 on page 127.
During the morning prayer, when the cantor, Reb Avram Yosef, may God avenge his blood, was reciting the blessings that are said in the morning, and he reached the blessing, "Blessed are you, Lord, sovereign of the universe, who has not made me a slave," he shouted bitterly to the master of all masters, "How can I recite this blessing when we are incarcerated and captured? How can a slave make a blessing of a free man when the burden of slavery is upon him? How can a slave repeatedly abused and demeaned, lacking his bread and water, praise his creator by uttering, 'Who has not made me a slave?'" He would do this every day during the morning blessings, and many of those who joined him in prayer because of their anger would support him. I was then asked for the Torah ruling on this question. Should the blessing be omitted because it seemed to be a lie, in which case it would be forbidden to recite it, or was it forbidden to alter or skip any part of the prayer text established by our sages?
Okay. The first question we want to ask ourselves is, what is the motivation of those that are asking this question? Mark, you want to try to give a stab at that? What do you think is the motivation of someone who's in the Lodge ghetto, or in the Kovna ghetto, or wherever he is, and he's clearly a slave? Mark, if you unmute yourself, then we'd love to hear your opinion, or Adam maybe. What is the motivation that they're asking, should they make this blessing or not?
It's desperation. They don't know which way to turn. They're under a lot of distress. Anything they can get that can reduce their suffering or their concern, is helpful.
Okay. Adam, what do you think here? By the way, Adam, why don't you try to answer the question?
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you try to answer their question? Because look at the way they're asking their question. They're asking, should they make this blessing? Because by making this blessing, they're sticking to, this is the language, this is the tradition, this is what they were supposed to do. And in a way, it's beautiful that they would continue making the blessing. No, they're continuing the Judaism even despite the harshest conditions.
Well, I mean, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago you described there weren't, the example of there weren't three choices. There were two, either you do or you don't.
Right.
You said it better than I just said it, but
Right.
you either live one way or you're not living. I think you kind of put it that way. So I think that I think that's what my answer to number one. For some of them, maybe I don't know.
I think you bring up a very, very good one. I'm going to use this to go into Rabbi Yoshi's answer. Rabbi Yoshi's answer is that they should make this blessing. Could you imagine? Now remember, this is the same Rabbi Oshri that just said you cannot make a blessing thanking God for taking you out of danger. The blessing Hagomel is a blessing that is made specifically for physical danger. If you're in physical danger, you cannot make that blessing. You can only make that blessing once the physical danger, the harrowing experience that you're going through has passed. But to make a blessing not to be a slave, he started to go back to the origins of it. It turns out that the origin of this prayer was not the origin of this prayer. The rabbis who made this prayer did not formulate it to praise God for our physical liberty. They made it to praise God for our spiritual liberty. If you go back to the original Talmudic excerpt, where the quote where they're making this blessing, there's a line there that goes, "Avadayhem v'lo avadim la'avadim," which means we are slaves, we are servants to God alone, and we're not servants to servants. Now that's not talking about physical slavery. A person can be someone else's. There's hundreds of thousands of people working in New York City for big law firms. They're all slaves. Trust me. Every single day they get up, they go to work, they're all slaves. But they're not slaves in the fact that, spiritually speaking, it's obviously a tongue-in-cheek, but what I mean is, like, they could be working for someone else. They could even have given their whole life up for their work, but their life is still in servitude of God. And hopefully whatever they're doing in those law firms, they're doing with the moral compass of the Torah, the way that they have spiritual freedom. So Rabbi Oshri's response was that just like you don't make the Hagomel blessing for leaving physical danger, you still do make the blessing, even while in the biggest physical danger, you make the blessing for being free spiritually. You make the blessing for the fact that I'm not a servant, even to these Nazi bastards. In other words, they can try to control me physically, but my mind is still free. What does that tell you about spiritual resistance?
That was my argument
that was for saying the blessing.
Saying it, but my reaction would be, I ain't saying the blessing.
Because he'd be upset at God. No problem. And we're not judging you here, by the way. And you, no, it's not true. You we would judge, no problem. But we're not judging those that didn't say the blessing. What we're providing here is one person's experience, a rabbi who's doing his best based on Torah law to answer these questions. And you see how he's essentially using the Torah to navigate these totally un-Torah-like scenarios, which I think tells us a lot about what's going on. Okay. These were two quote-unquote simple questions. Let's get to a very, very difficult one. This next question needs an introduction of what was going on at the time and how things worked. Mark, if I can ask you to read for us text 8a on page 128 is the intro, just so that you understand what happened when there was what they call an action or a selection. Go ahead.
Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Meisels was a scion of a distinguished Hasidic and rabbinic family and was the rabbi of Wietzen in Hungary. Before being transported to Auschwitz, he had already achieved a considerable reputation as a halachic scholar and was the author of a volume of responsa. He tells of the events which took place in Auschwitz on the eve of Rosh Hashanah in 1944. The Nazi commander of Auschwitz had determined to keep alive only those boys between the ages of 14 and 18 who were big enough and strong enough to work. The others would be sent to the crematorium. 1,400 boys were imprisoned in a special cell block under the guard of the Jewish kapos. The next morning, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, fathers or other relatives who had heard of the fate that awaited the children tried to persuade the kapos to release them. The kapos replied that an exact count had been taken of the boys, and they would have to pay with their own lives if even one were to be found missing. Some of the relatives still had valuables concealed in their clothing or on their bodies, and they offered them to the kapos in return for the lives of their children. Succumbing to greed, the kapos agreed to release some of the prisoners, but they warned for each prisoner released, they would have to see some other Jewish boy who had escaped the selection, so that the count would be full when the block's inmates were taken to the crematoria. Although they knew that their sons' lives would be spared only at the cost of others, fathers made whatever deals they could to save their own children.
Does anybody blame these fathers? I mean, you're talking about literally the most difficult decisions that any human being has ever needed to make.
Yeah.
And this brings us to our third responsa, which is the Rosh Hashanah selection. So text 8a introduced us to the fact that it was the first day of Rosh Hashanah, literally tomorrow morning, and heaven forbid. And this, just as a reminder, the fact that the Nazis were fighting a spiritual battle, this wasn't by chance that it happened on Rosh Hashanah. They designed these things to be on Jewish holidays, just like Hamas designed their attack to be on Simchat Torah, etc. Because our enemies know that what sustains us is not just our physical existence, but also our spiritual existence. So that's a parenthetical that maybe is a topic for another time. And in text 8b, we get a gut-wrenching question that comes before Rabbi Oshry. Susie, if I can ask you to read it for us, please. It's text 8b. We're on page 130. It's the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and a father approaches Rabbi Oshry and asks him the following.
I was approached by a man who said the following: Rabbi, my only son, more precious than the pupil of my eye, is there among those condemned to the crematorium. I have the ability to ransom him, but since we indubitably know that if he is released, the kapos will take another in his place who will be killed, I therefore ask of the rabbi a question which demands a response to an actual situation. Render a judgment in accordance with the Torah. May I ransom him? Whatever your ruling, I will obey it.
Could you imagine being Rabbi Oshry? Yeah. I'm actually not going to ask you to be Rabbi Oshry, because I think that's a very, very difficult question to answer, and we're going to see the end of the story in just a moment. But I want to ask what it says about the man's worldview that he's asking a rabbi. Susie, what do you think? What does this say about the man? And look at the way he asks it. He says to him, I therefore ask of the rabbi a question which demands a response to an actual situation. In Hebrew, this is called Shaila Halacha Lamaisa. This is a practical halachic question. He didn't have look. If I was the rabbi, he would have looked at me and said, Rabbi, this isn't a JLI class. This is a real life situation. Give me an answer. I need to know what to do. What does it tell you about the way he lives his life?
Ruthless. He's.
Jeff says he's a decent man.
Very decent.
Very decent man.
Yeah, but I think beyond that, I mean, he's torn between his allegiance to the Torah and his allegiance to his son.
I would argue he's not torn.
You don't think
he's not torn. Somebody who is torn about their allegiance to the Torah doesn't ask a question of a rabbi like this.
Fair enough. Yeah.
They wrestle with it on their own or whatever, and that's. If you come to a rabbi to ask a question, I would argue this is a man who Torah to him is not just a nice, wonderful, inspiring thing. Like, oh, I love the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who cares if they happened or not? They inspire me. It's wonderful. No. This is a man to whom Torah is milashon hara. That the word Torah comes from the root word hora, which means a wayfinder, to show the way, a lesson. He's looking to the Torah even in this situation. Does anybody here think that he thought that you would open up the Torah and it would say, well, if somebody tells you can save your son, but you're going to have to destroy somebody else's son, this is what you should do. He doesn't think it says that clearly in the Torah, but he's using the framework that the Torah has given him to say, this is where I'm going to get my answer from. I refuse to take an answer not from my brain, heaven forbid. I refuse to take an answer from my heart, because it can lead me astray. My love for my child will lead me astray. I want a rabbi, a third party, someone who's going to answer only based on the Torah. Obviously, he had a trust for Rabbi Oshry that he's going to do that, right? I want him to answer me based on the Torah. And I think that says a lot. That says a lot about. Now, I'm curious, does anybody think there's something deficient in the man's love towards his son? No. No. He clearly wants his son to survive, right? He just wants to know, can he ransom his son, knowing that somebody else's child will not survive? We chose to replace him. I want to tell you the end of the story, because the story comes with a postscript, which I think is so important. Okay, I'm going to read aloud here from his book. I have it here quoted. It's a very difficult text to read, but bear with me here. He tells him as follows. My beloved child, how can I determine the halacha in such a grave matter under these conditions? Here I am in Auschwitz, without any halachic source books, with no other rabbis with whom to consult, and without the necessary clarity of mind, because of these dreadful circumstances. But the man with a great cry, urging me, said, Rabbi, you must give me a definite answer, as this is a burning question while there is still time to save my only son's life. And I was pleading with him, my dear and beloved Jew, please, I beg you, desist from asking me this question. I cannot give you any kind of answer without consulting sources, especially under the fearful and terrible circumstances. The father responded, Rabbi, this means that you cannot permit me to ransom my only son. So be it. I accept his judgment in love. I continue to implore the man not to rely upon me, and I protested his conclusion. Beloved Jew, I did not say that you could not ransom your child. I just said I cannot rule either yes or no. Do what you wish, as though you had never asked me. After seeing that I was not about to give in, and that I would not render a halachic ruling, he said with much emotion, Rabbi, I have done what the Torah has obligated me to do. I have asked a question of a rabbi. There is no other rabbi here. If you cannot tell me that I may ransom my child, it is a sign that in your own mind, and remember, he looks at Rabbi Ashri as somebody who's well-versed in the Torah, that in your own mind, you are not certain that the halacha permits it. For if you were certain that it is permitted, you would unquestionably have told me so. So for me, your evasion is tantamount to a clear decision that I am forbidden to do so by halacha. This is enough for me. So my only son will lose his life according to the Torah and the halacha. I accept this with love and with joy. I will do nothing to ransom him at the cost of another innocent life, for so the Torah has commanded. I think this says another point about this Jew. And again, I want to clarify. There were hundreds, if not, or tens for sure, who did ransom their children. And obviously another child was taken in their stead. We're not judging those people. What we're trying to do here is to learn from the Holocaust one person at a time from their experience and see how their experience can shape our own experience in terms of living life. And I want to point something out here. This particular man, it's a powerful illustration, not just because he asks the question, also because look at the way he struggles at the end. He says, you know what? I have just realized what the answer is without you telling it to me. And more important, and by the way, there's other discussions that people have, totally not the topic of today's conversation, about whether, with all the source books that we have today, can we actually give a ruling to this question? What would the actual ruling be? Maybe it would be because you don't know specifically whose life you're putting in danger, that therefore it's allowed, whatever. I'm not going there. That could be a whole different discussion. What I do want to talk about is the fact that this man struggles with himself. And you hear him saying it to himself that he wants to accept this with love. Why? Because in his view, there is only one way to live life. And that is to live life as per the Torah. That could be a good life, that could be a horrible life, but that's the only way to live life. When things are good, he lives according to the Torah. I'm sure he would have come to Rabbi Ashri and said to him, hey, Rabbi, my wife just gave birth to our only son. I need to make a blessing. What is the blessing that I make to thank God for this son? In this situation, he's coming with the opposite question. But regardless, he's coming to the rabbi. Regardless, he's coming to the Torah. He wants to ask the Torah this question. And again, I want to stress, we're not judging here. Our goal here is to look at these stories as historians, to appreciate these stories, because these stories were not written down in order to influence the future generations. That might be why they were published, but that's not why they were written down. They were written down just for that generation, for them to know what to do in that situation. That's why Rabbi Yashua wrote it down. I think the main point to take from this story is that we can view halacha, we can view Torah as our moral compass for how to live our lives. That, if it can work in that situation, it can certainly work in our own lives. I want to read you the postscript of the end of this story. The 1,400 boys who had been condemned to the crematorium and were locked up in one of the blocks learned that I had a shofar. This is Rabbi Meisels is writing this. For those of you that noticed, this one is not Rabbi Oshri. This one is Rabbi Meisels, right? Which is another rabbi during the Holocaust era, right? I neglected to make that point earlier. I meant to point out there's a different rabbi now that we jumped to. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, right? So he writes, they heard that I had a shofar. Remember, this is the first day of Rosh Hashanah. They began to cry out and plead bitterly that I should enter their block and sound the 100 blasts for them in order that they should have the precious mitzvah of shofar in their last moments before they would be burned, al kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. I did not know what to do, for it was a very dangerous situation. It was already towards evening when the Nazis were expected to come to take them. Should they come suddenly and find me among them, there was no doubt that they would take me to the crematorium. The boys cried out bitterly. Rebbe, come for God's sake. Have pity on us. Let us have the merit of this mitzvah in our last moments. The entreaties of the boys did not allow me to rest and aroused within me great sympathy. I came to the conclusion that regardless of whatever happened to me, I will not turn them down. I took the precaution and commanded my son Zalman Leib to stand outside and watch the gate of the camp. If he would see the SS men approaching, he would run to inform me so I could leave the block immediately, even if I was in the middle of sounding the shofar. After the sounding of the shofar, when I was about to leave the block, one boy stood up and cried out, "My dear friends, the Rebbe has strengthened our spirits by telling us that even if a sharp sword rests on an individual's throat, he should not despair of God's mercy. I say to you, we can hope for the best, but we must be prepared for the worst. For God's sake, let us not forget to cry out Shema Yisrael with devotion at the last moment." If anybody on this Zoom doesn't hear shofar tomorrow after this, oh boy, I don't want to lay down the guilt, you know what I mean? But you have two opportunities, 12 o'clock here at Chabad or 5:45 at Caltech. But if these 1,400 boys can hear, boys and girls, or it's just boys, I think it's just boys, if they can hear shofar in a situation like this, if they can even beg somebody to give up his life to hear a shofar, then we can make it to Chabad, to one of the thousands of times the Chabad will be blowing it over the course of the day. Not thousands, but tens of times to hear the shofar. Okay, end my Jewish guilt for the day. I do want to just still play the historian, if we can. And I want to look at this story and appreciate it for what it's worth. What is the most important thing to these boys? The most important thing, the most important element of their existence is the Torah and mitzvot. Is keeping and they know that this is not going to last for a lot longer. They know. But they also know that without it, they cannot live. Which leads me into the next and final point that I want to make in terms of the way that this works in our own lives. Yekara hi mipaz, it is more precious than gold. I want to start off with an exercise. Okay? On the screen in front of you, we have a verse from the Torah. It's from Deuteronomy. Torah tziva lanu Moshe Marasha Kilat Yaakov. The Torah was commanded by Moses, a heritage or an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. What do you think the word inheritance tells you about the Torah? What do you think the word heritage? Why can't the Torah be called a gift? Why can't the Torah be called a sale? Why can't the Torah be called, I don't know, something you earn? Why is it called a heritage? Marilyn, go ahead. No, you're muted. You have to unmute, sorry.
It's meant to be passed on from generation to generation.
Correct. It's meant to be passed on from generation to generation. And I will add, whether you know it or whether you don't. Every single one of you on this Zoom, and even those that are watching the video after the fact, the Torah is yours. It's yours by dint of the fact that you're Jewish. It's yours even if you kick and scream and protest and you don't want it to be yours. It's yours even if you choose for the first 30, 50, 80 years of your life not to pay attention to it. The Torah is yours. The mitzvot are yours. The heritage is yours. The connection to Hashem is yours. Heaven forbid it should take a situation like the Holocaust or like October 7th to bring it out in somebody, but sometimes that is the way it works. It's there. It's yours. And it doesn't make a difference what your relationship to it is. I want to read text 9 with you, and I want you to bear in mind who it is that's being quoted here, okay? We're going to be mentioning Dr. Leo Beck. Okay, Dr. Leo Beck was deported in 1943. He was the leader, not of the Orthodox movement, not even of the conservative movement, but of the progressive Judaism in Germany, and later he was the chairman of its World Union. Jeff, can you read for us, please, text 9?
Jews did not sit and weep in Pharisaindrat. They revealed superhuman steadfastness by secretly assembling in the darkness of night in order to study Torah, to participate in courses on Jewish subjects, and to listen to lectures on eternal questions, the mysteries of existence beyond the reach of human understanding. Quote, "I shall never forget these meetings," wrote Dr. Beck. "We would assemble in pitch darkness. To light a candle or even a match would have brought immediate disaster upon all of us. Nevertheless, in the midst of all of that darkness, I sensed light. The faces of these Jews were illuminated by an unearthly radiance, as one was talking to them about matters of the Spirit and the eternal questions about God, about Jews and the world, about the eternity of Israel. I sensed a light in that darkness, the light of the Torah. I often contemplated my people. Their faces I could not distinguish, but I saw great light."
You know, every year I publish one of these booklets, yes? I spoke about it a few times. In fact, I published one of these booklets. It has all the Torah learning opportunities in Pasadena. Beautiful. And every year, on the first page, I need to come up with a letter. Okay? It's a short letter. And the letter basically reads, this is the offerings we're going to have this year, etc. But I treat it as a little more than that. I try to make it personal, and I try to have it reflect whatever the past year was like. And ironically, I guess it's just part of living life, we're entering now our 9th year of the Academy being in existence. So that means that I've written 9 such letters. I wrote a letter like this in I guess I usually write them in August or September, right? I wrote a letter like this in August and September of 2020, reflecting on a crazy few months of the beginning of COVID, and lots of people that I loved and that I knew that had died or that had long COVID, or that, it hit my hometown of Crown Heights very, very strongly. And if you look at that letter, I don't know how many of you have kept them all and have a collection of all of them. I wish. If you look at that letter, it basically says, yes, now let's find ways to study Torah. And I revamped the whole booklet to figure out during COVID, how do we study Torah on Zoom? I think I taught half of you how to use Zoom, because I was so desperate to teach Torah on Zoom that we figured out how to use Zoom, and then we had social distancing things, and we had an event in the parking lot with everybody in their cars, but using the radio, all sorts of creative ways to continue to study Torah. A couple years later, we had October 7th, and again I had to write a letter. Well, it was a difficult year for the Jewish people, but it doesn't make a difference. The Torah is still our guiding light. And we had events about Israel, and we had courses about Israel, and we had courses about why Israel is so important, and is Israel doing the right thing in fighting the war? And I know many of you attended How Israel Wins, which is a class that we gave. We gave a class about hostages to understand what is the Torah view on hostages, etc. Because that's what it means to take the Torah and apply it to your life. And I wrote it again this year, after the Eaton fire, and there are many people that we all went through, even if you were perfectly fine, like I was, right? But our community was hit, and that means we have to support each other, we have to be there for each other. And many people moved, and it's been a year which, reflecting on this year, is reflecting on a difficult year again, and yet somehow the last paragraph always stays the same. It's always through good times and through bad, the Torah is still there for us, etc. And I'm sure sometimes I come off just very preachy, very rabbinic, but this is what we mean. This is what we mean. What we mean is that wherever we are in life, whether things are doing well, whether things are doing not so well, whether we're suffering through one thing or through another thing. Oh, wow, thank you. Label, you went?
Yeah, I was trying to put my kids to sleep.
How did you know to go?
I didn't. I figured that I'd go.
Okay, I was going to Uber. Thank you. I appreciate that. Through good times or through bad, we turn to the Torah. The topic of today's lesson, the name of today's lesson comes from the Vizot HaTorah, which we say when we lift the Torah in the shul, we sing it together. Vizot HaTorah. What do we say? Eitz Chaim Lamachati. What does that mean? It means it is a tree of life to those for those who hold fast to it. No matter what the situation in your life, the Torah is there to guide you. We'll conclude. We're going to skip the last text. You know what? I think we have some time to read it. Let's read it. Okay. Elise, are you here with us? I can't see you, but I see you're here.
Yes.
Okay. If you can read text 10.
Rabbi, can ask people to turn off their microphones. Somebody's making a lot of noise.
That was just while I was singing Eitz Chaim. Somebody was singing Eitz Chaim together.
Oh, yeah. No. It's some kind of banging. Somebody's doing that close to their mic.
It's from my end. Okay. Yeah, anybody who's not reading, if you can mute, it could be it's from my end. Sometimes when I shake the desk, the mic is on the desk. Okay. But Elise, if you can read for us, please.
Okay.
Page 132, text 10.
Okay. I was asked to render a halachic decision on the following. In the hospital of the Kovno ghetto, there was a boy that was ill. The Germans had placed him in the hospital to recover after amputating his leg. This boy wished to pour out his heart in prayer each day. Therefore, he asked that a pair of tefillin be sent to him in the hospital so that he should be able to pray as mandated by Jewish law. However, there was a persistent rumor in the ghetto that the Germans burned every patient's personal possessions upon his recovery and dismissal from the hospital. I was asked whether it was permitted to send this boy tefillin, for should he recover, the Germans would burn them along with his other belongings. This would mean that by sending him the tefillin, the senders would cause the tefillin to be burned. Reply. It is permitted to send tefillin to this boy so that he may fulfill the commandment. Bind these words as a sign on your hand. and let them be an emblem in the center of your head. It is not definite that the Germans will burn the personal belongings of those discharged from the hospital. It is possible that this rumor is merely a product of fright and fear because the rumor is unverified. It is therefore certainly permitted to send him the tefillin. Based on the above, I ruled that they should send to this boy a valid pair of tefillin so that he would be able to fulfill his mitzvah, and in this way his heart and spirit would be calm. Dr. Davidovich, who was a doctor in this hospital, testified that he was present when the boy was presented with the tefillin. When the boy donned them for the first time, his joy knew no bounds. It was as if he had emerged from darkness to light and from captivity to freedom.
These are the types of questions that Jews were asking while they were in the death camps, while they were in the ghettos. And there's so many supplementary texts, by the way, in the back that we just can't possibly read them all, mitzvah after mitzvah. Here's Rivka Cooper. You can see it on the screen in front of you, right? It's text F on page 143. This is from her testimony at the Eichmann trial. She says, we had no bread, there was nothing to eat, but somehow we managed to get candles. Here's Rabbi Joshua Aronson. This is also one of the supplementary texts. Which one is it? It's text D on page 139. He says, when we arose in the darkness of the night and we had just managed to wash, the block leaders and their helpers were hurrying us along to the forced labor details. There were long queues of prisoners waiting in line, not for bread or coffee, but to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin. We appointed a special guard whose job it was to make sure that no one kept the tefillin on for longer than it took him to say the one verse Shema Yisrael, and that's it, so that more would be able to fulfill this mitzvah. After some time, we were taken to another camp. They did not even have one pair of tefillin. How great was their joy when they discovered that we had brought a pair with us. About 500 Jews recited the blessing that first day, and so it was every day thereafter. The pressure was so great that we were compelled to divide the set of tefillin. One group used only the shel rosh, the head tefillin, and the other the shel yad, the hand tefillin. Understandably, each group recited only the one blessing appropriate in each case. There was no other way. We felt it was better that each one should fulfill at least part of the mitzvah than that only some should be able to fulfill it completely. This was really an elixir of life for us. Should I throw in some more guilt? If anybody misses a rap club ever again. Okay, all right, fine, enough. Jeff is feeling it. Here's the point that we're making, okay? And this is the point I want to leave you with. I want you to consider the following questions to bring the point of this lesson, the relevance of this lesson home for every single one of us. Ask yourself, what elements of Jewish tradition have become a part of my way of life? The parts that I have done, right? Ask yourself how those Jewish traditions are not just traditions, but they're actually things that have shaped your worldview, the way that you view things, the way that you make decisions in your life. And ask yourself, even though you haven't been through a Holocaust, how, thank God, how has it enabled you through difficult times? You know, there are some people on here or that would be watching the video that have lost their homes in the fire or that were displaced for many months because of the fire. How did your community, your Jewish community, your Judaism, your tefillin, your Shabbos candles, your whatever it is, maybe your Moda'ani or your Shema, how did these things sustain you through those difficult times? I know, I've heard about it from so many people. Rabbi, you have no idea what it's like to wake up the morning after you lose your entire home and to say, Moda'ani, thank you Hashem for giving me another day. I know I had people here who came here the morning, they came here at 5 o'clock in the morning after the fire on January 8th. Right? They came, right? Or January 7th, whatever, the morning after, on Wednesday morning, the 8th. They came here and they said, Rabbi, I'm here for a coffee, and as soon as we can, it was at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was here already, I'd like to put on tefillin with you. I want to daven from my house. They had no idea if their house was still standing. And then they credit the fact that daven to Hashem, even I wouldn't, but they credit the fact that Hashem saved their house because of that. And other parts of their house fell down. And they haven't missed a day of tefillin or a week of tefillin since. That we put it on once a week with this particular fellow. He puts on with me every single week now, and he tells me it's out of thankfulness to Hashem. Our Judaism should not only be there when life is difficult, but when life does get difficult, it should help to sustain us. The things that are here with us every single day. The fact that we're going to hear shofar this year, and we're not going to need to put our lives on the line for it. That should sustain us through the difficult moments in our lives when we do have a hard time. Our Judaism should be there. Our Yiddishkeit should be there. The Torah should be there. And all of the mitzvahs should be there in order to guide us, in order to keep us strong, and to show us the right way and the right decisions no matter what life throws at us. And with this, we'll conclude our 5th lesson of Beyond Never Again, which was titled A Tree of Life for Those Who Hold Fast to It. And I look forward to seeing you next week for Lesson 6, which will be in person and on Zoom. Again, my apologies for this class being only on Zoom. Lesson 6, When Night Will Shine Like Day. If you have 30 more seconds, I just want to remind you all, that we have an upcoming course right after the holidays. This is my last opportunity to push it before the holidays. The Yiddish course, please turn your attention to the video screens for a brief trailer for this course. Oh, whoops, I have to, how do I do it? I gotta make sure it's a video share. There we go. Okay.
Auf und triebig brennt der Feuer und in Stub ist heiß und der Rebbe lernt meine Kinder dem alle Preis und der Rebbe lernt meine Kinder dem alle Preis. Gedenkt Heier, was ihr lernt da, und ihr sagt schon noch einmal, und Tag noch einmal. Kommt, Aleph, und sagt schon noch einmal, und Tag noch einmal. Kommt, Aleph, und
Ich bin ich, weil du bist du, und du bist du, weil ich bin ich, demals bin ich nicht dich, und du bist nicht du. Nee, aber ich bin ich, weil ich bin ich, und du bist du, weil du bist du, demals bin ich hier, und du bist du. Schäm sich nicht, mit wem du bist. Schäm doch nicht! Der heilige Kotzke geht zu verstehen. Die beste, schönste, feinste Sache zu sein ist, sei sich allein.
So again, it's a 4-week starter course, Navigating the World of Yiddish. It starts October 16th. It's $89 per person. It will be Thursday evenings at 6:30 p.m. If you'd like to join us, please let me know, and I will make it happen. Other than that, I want to thank you all for joining us today for this lesson. I'll see you next week for the grand finale, in person, hopefully. For those who want to keep on Zoom, there will still be on Zoom, but in person. And until such time, I want to wish you a ketiva v'chatima tova. You should be written and inscribed for a good year, l'shana tova matuka, for a good and sweet new year. And may we all merit to celebrate it together in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim with Mashiach Tzidkenu, with our righteous Redeemer. May it be speedily in our days. Amen.